Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar titled Regional Council State Coordination for Initial BEAD Allocation Proposals. We would like to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Jessica Routson. I am the Program Manager at the National Association of Regional Councils. Today, we are joined by the Economic Development Administration and 3 regional councils to discuss regional and state coordination of broadband initiatives. Many of you may know that in late July, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA, revealed the long anticipated state allocations for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, otherwise known as BEAD. This is a $42 billion investment into the nation's broadband network. Now, while regional councils, economic development districts, and other regional planning organizations are not receiving direct funding from this investment, they certainly have a role and a part to play in the planning of these funds. Today, we will hear from regional organizations on how they are coordinating with their state broadband offices as they develop these initial proposals and future required plans for the BEAD program. This webinar today is being offered to you through the NATO Research Foundation's Economic Development District Community of Practice. This is funded, of course, by the Economic Development Administration, who is with us today. And before we dive into the roundtable discussion, EDA is here with us to discuss some of their broadband programs and support offered through the community of practice. Without further delay, I am pleased to welcome and introduce Nancy Gilbert, a senior program analyst from EDA's Office of Economic Development Integration. Nancy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica, and really appreciate the opportunity just to make a couple of introductory comments here about our role in broadband, but more importantly, I think our role in helping our stakeholders, including economic development districts and other regional planning partners that we have, access the array of federal funding for economic development. And certainly broadband is an important part of today's economic development foundation. So I put together a couple of slides. Jessica, if you want to show those, I can just take people quickly through those.
All right, I am having trouble pulling those up. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's not a Zoom webinar if something doesn't go wrong.
Okay. That's right. I should probably start by saying too that EDA works very closely with our commerce partner, NTIA, on coordinating different resources for broadband, because a lot of what we do is before and after the deployment of those broadband funds. So one of the things, and you can just move on to the next one, that's me here at EDA. You know, a lot of people look to the Economic Development Administration as a grant funding agency, and we certainly are that. And we do provide funding, as I said. We have done broadband projects, we have done plans for broadband, and we do a lot of the economic development that occurs as a result of having a strong foundation of high-speed internet that supports your business activities. We're more than just grant making, and that's one of the things I wanted to flag for you all today. Certainly access to grants and resources is important. Best practice sharing has become increasingly important, I think, to bring the voice of practitioners like those on the phone today from one region to share that information across them. And that is why we've invested in communities of practice like the Economic Development District Community of Practice that's bringing this to you today. And we also are focused on capacity building. So we kind of consider those the ABCs, the access to funding, the best practice sharing, and the capacity building that help our stakeholders connect. Here I'm showing some of the ways in which we have and still can fund broadband. It's a complex kind of grant making, but we can do the strategy planning, the feasibility studies that you might need, some of the infrastructure, and certainly the technical assistance around that. Our programs are here. We always recommend that you contact your EDA, Economic Development Representative, to talk about your project and discover, what funding program it may be best suited for. So on the next page, here I just wanted to share with you again that kind of best practice sharing and capacity building that we're doing. We did have the opportunity to make awards to expand some of the work that partners that you've been working with before, like NATO and NARC, are doing. They're in partnership now with this EDD community of practice, and we're so excited for some of the case studies, the EDDs in Action series that is featuring some of the work that you're doing in broadband and other areas of infrastructure. We really want to lift up the promising practices that you all are doing, have a forum for sharing those across regions, and really hoping that they will transform these individual work that you're doing into more of a connected learning community. So you can join the community of practice if you're not already active in it here. Certainly there's no cost for you to join that. And I hope you'll go to that website and look for those resources there. And on the next slide, just wanted to share with you, because EDA has done more investment in broadband in the past, and we had some of the large supplemental funding under the CARES Act and the ARPA Funding Act prior to NTIA receiving their $42 billion in funding. A lot of our partners look to EDA to help fill that gap and get started on that plan. Now we've really turned the mic over to NTIA to do that funding through the states, and as you know, and that's what you all will talk about here. NTIA, our partners, gave the following advice here, which is to make sure that you're engaging with your state and territory regarding their plans for high-speed internet access. Sometimes they have additional funding from other funding streams. There are a wide variety of federal funding streams. A lot of that information is on the Internet for All website. You can search it by need, by purpose, and by eligibility for it there. And we'll share out these slides so you have all these slide links here. There is an NTIA federal program officer for each state, and that's an important resource that we hope that you will get to know and work with, so that they can guide you through the BEAD program, and as well as the other NTIA and other federal programs too. There are guides online that will help you with that. There's a technical assistance hub to answer your questions. And there's an Internet for All at ntia.gov website that's kind of the catch-all for any questions you might have about the program that certainly we can't answer. But we can assure you that between FCC, NTIA, EDA, our partners over at USDA Rural Development, certainly they have a lot of resources as well. And you may be surprised to know that HUD and Department of Labor and the libraries, organizations also have funding for this. So there's really a wide variety of funds out there. It's difficult to coordinate and navigate, so I hope you'll use some of these resources for that purpose. And then in the last slide here, I just also wanted to share with you some of the other tools. If you're still in the planning stage, you might want to check out some of these EDA tools that will help you bring together a lot of information on whether you're looking at your industry clusters, your risks from disasters or other things. So I hope you'll check out these tools that are available to help you putting those plans together. There's also a pre-development guidebook. We heard from a lot of EDDs that pre-development work is an area that's a barrier for some. And so we funded a toolkit by the Milken Institute that will help hopefully with some of that work. Lastly, I think it's just my contact information, and then we can turn it over to the real experts in the room here. If you look at that QR code there, you'll get sign up for all of EDA's information funding opportunities as they come out. Some of our awards are rolling, other ones have deadlines, so it's always good to be aware of that. And we feature success stories like we recently did with the Missouri Broadband plan that they're doing there. So without more said on that, I'll turn it over to you to get started with the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy and EDA, for providing all of those great resources. I think folks tend to think of FCC and NTIA when they think of broadband funding, but you've shown us that EDA is a resource as well, and you're doing some great things. So thank you. And I just want to let everyone know on the call that we will be sharing those slides and Nancy's contact information should you have questions for her or, you know, about any of the resources that she shared on the call. And with that, I will keep things moving. The next portion, as Nancy mentioned, is us hearing from 3 regional representatives on how they are working with their states regarding broadband initiatives, BEAD included. So joining us today, we have Ginny Lewis Ford, the Executive Director at the Texas Association of Regional Councils. We have Andy Waple, the Deputy Executive Director at the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. And we have John Staveney, the Executive Director at the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. And I am just going to turn things right over to our panelists and ask them to just further give us some background on who you are, which organizations you represent, and maybe some of your background in this area on broadband or.
Ladies first, I assume.
Yes.
On this one. Hi, I'm Ginny Lewis Ford. I'm the Executive Director for the Texas Association of Regional Councils. As Jessica said, thank you for having me, Jessica and NARC. I represent the 24 councils of governments in Texas on an array of programs, including our relationships with EDA, all of our health and human services programs, 911, solid waste, transportation, the list goes on and on. Each of those councils is an economic development district and partners with EDA Region 6 here in Austin, where we are headquartered. I do not have a background in broadband. I'm an attorney. So I never expected to be working on broadband, but I think we've all found ourselves in a position to kind of build this ship as we're flying it and jump in where appropriate and step up where needed. So just like all of you at the regional council level, at the state association level, we're also on a steep learning curve, but making sure that local governments' voices are heard in this process has been very important to us as representatives of the COGS who work for our cities and counties in Texas.
Right.
I'll
Hi,
pass
everybody.
the baton to Andy.
Sorry, Jenny. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Andy Waple. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. And again, I want to echo Ginny's sentiments. Thanks, Jess, and thanks, NARC. And, thank you for all of your time out there, those that are tuned in. The Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission covers the 10 counties in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania, obviously. Including the city of Pittsburgh. We are the the EDA development district, as well as the MPO for the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Southwestern Pennsylvania. So we cover both economic development and transportation, as well as a number of other things. We have a water resources center and environmental programs, and then also, most recently, we have a broadband program that I'm overseeing, and much like Ginny, I'm a transportation planner, practicing, have some experience in community development as well, but I was brought into our to lead our broadband planning initiative, probably around the same time many of you were during COVID. We knew that broadband was a huge issue in southwestern Pennsylvania. It's our region is very diverse. It's over 7,000 square miles, ranging from very dense in the urban core of Pittsburgh to the suburbs of Allegheny County and surrounding to the very, very rural areas of like Greene and Indiana County. So, we have a lot of broadband issues, and we knew that. But going into COVID, we had some interest from one of our foundations in the city of Pittsburgh to really begin a regional broadband program, and they were able to provide funding for us to do a strategic plan and to develop some tools and resources to help our counties and municipalities and partners to try to address that issue regionally. So again, I gave myself a crash course on broadband planning over my Christmas vacation, and I think it was 2020, and developed our approach for our regional program. So, again, not an expert, but we trying the best we can. So thanks for having us, and I will pass it over to John.
Hi, everybody. John Stavney, Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. We cover the 6 sort of mountain counties in the middle of the state. The resort counties, probably the easiest way for you to remember this, from Steamboat Springs, including Aspen and Vail, Beaver Creek and whatnot. So we've been in the broadband business for about a decade. There's in Colorado a rather unique entity called the Department of Local Affairs that is out of the governor's office to support local governments. They actually do a lot of parallel things to what COGS do in many places. But we, in working with DOLA back in the day, 10 years ago or more before I started 7 years ago, realized that a number of our jurisdictions were already doing some version of local broadband. Vail was doing local Wi-Fi already to deal with events. Steamboat Springs communities, the school district, county town, and the hospital district there were working together because they were having trouble getting good pricing, and there was only one provider up there in Steamboat Springs, and so they got together to collectively bargain with that provider and actually built a loop network. Glenwood Springs, which is within our region as well, is a town, a city that has been doing electric utility for more than 100 years, had been in the broadband business and just started the broadband business. So we had some expertise already in our region, and the Department of Local Affairs asked us to and help fund a regional broadband plan, which is posted on our website. One of the major issues, one of the first things that came out of that plan was the need for technical advice. So now for a decade, we've had somebody who works one step below me, who is the director of the regional broadband technical assistance. So in the process of providing technical assistance to our 31 member jurisdictions, towns and counties, we helped out. We helped bring basically between DOLA and some other funding, state funding, which is really great funding in our case because it comes without a lot of those strings that federal funding comes with. DOLA has mineral energy and mineral funds that are siphoned off to the legislature for grants, which is fantastic. But we've brought $30 million, or helped bring $30 million worth of local projects being funded, including fiber, up in our area. So in the midst of that, we also realized there was a huge gap in talking to these local governments at all different levels of just thinking about broadband to, somebody gets elected and says, hey, talk to me about broadband, or new manager, to some of those more sophisticated entities that are already involved in it. We did learning by assisting and working with each of those and shared that back out across the community. But one thing we really learned was that there was a lack of middle mile. So for the last 5 years, we've been involved in and owned and managed, in fact, conceived of and built and owned and manage a middle mile network that serves 9 counties and 15 rural towns and cities. So I'll probably stop there. But we are in sort of a technical assistance business and also in this business of operating a middle mile network. I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you all. One question I have for you, as we mentioned with the BEAD funding and other sources like ARPA, we haven't seen this much funding for broadband ever, so many folks who have not been involved with broadband might be entering into this space, as some of you have even indicated. So one question I might have for you is, who should be at the broadband table and how do we get them there? And I'll turn it over to you, Ginny. We'll go in order.
Sure. I think it's important that you have your decision makers at the regional level at a common table. As you mentioned, Jess, there's a lot of funding, and so there are a lot of sharks in the water, is what I've been saying, and consultants who are looking for opportunity to help your communities. And oftentimes a role that regional councils can play is that convener, as that planner. And if they are going to go that route, making sure that they're speaking to their neighbors to know what they are doing, what they are planning, and what they're being charged, quite frankly, by those that are kind of swimming around in the space and comparing notes. So I think it's important that at the very least, you have your local elected officials around the table talking about this topic, whether your regional council is an expert or not. There's very much a space for local leadership about this topic, just as any other infrastructure topic, because if we're not included in the conversation, the ISPs just go about doing their business. Who is going to maintain these networks? Who's going to make sure that they're affordable for your citizens? And then what's our long-term viability plan? Oftentimes, when they leave, it falls on the local governments to pick up the pieces for that sort of infrastructure. So very important that they're there. I also think it's important to have the ISPs at the table that are already in your community and those that are thinking about coming in. They are the eligible applicants for the BEAD money and likely will be for other sources. So I would say having those ISPs at your table is also very important. Kind of make them compete against each other, see what they're doing, free market, some competition in the marketplace as they all sit around the common table and hear what your needs are. The other thing we've been successful at doing at many of our regional councils is to have our foundation partners at the table. A lot of the community foundations are very interested in funding broadband planning, broadband projects, digital literacy projects, and other items. So I would say those folks are important, along with your partners, if available, from NTIA, USDA, and any EDA representatives, I think, are important because the funding, again, will continue to probably flow through those entities. We've also, our broadband development office that was mentioned, I think by one of the earlier speakers, was formed in 2021. So it hasn't been around as long as John's in Colorado, nor do we have a direct person in our governor's office to interface with local governments. So we as an association have really taken on that role to bring in our county associations, our municipal associations, and all of those other stakeholders to the table to kind of demand that our state broadband office interface with local elected officials and regional councils. They were having early on conversations with internet service providers about BEAD and other opportunities and BOOT and kind of structuring the program in our state, and they weren't getting input from the regional or local level. So we really exerted some influence to encourage them, strongly encourage them to start hosting a monthly broadband call with locals, nonprofits, and regional councils, so that we also had a space to hear that same information, comment on proposed rules, and as they continue to roll out their administration of the program. So very important to get in as early as you can, because your state broadband office, which is now required, has already adopted a 5-year plan, which was due August 28th for the BEAD program, and they are likely already or are in the process of developing administrative rules for how they're going to roll out this program and consider the input of local communities. So those are some of the things, as some of the stakeholders, I think it's important. They don't have to be at the table all of the time, but you should have at your table as you're the leader in your communities, or if you do have a state association, to encourage them to take on that role for you. I know many states don't, and some of you have EDs that rotate through, but whoever is the leading voice for your regional councils in your state really needs to make sure they're interfacing with those state and federal entities as well. I'll pass it to John. We're going to go out of order.
Oh, curveball. So thank you for that, Jenny. You know, I said a question about how we're part of a larger statewide solution. So the CBO, Colorado Broadband Office, has only been in existence for the last couple of years, and their main focus, as Jenny was sort of suggesting, is compliance really with BEAD and getting the state prepared to handle that BEAD money, which they've done a fantastic job on kind of a shoestring budget with just a few people who are getting up to speed. So there is a state broadband office, and they do provide some technical assistance in Colorado, primarily for BEAD, right? So that is something that we have not had to do so much at a local level. But I'll kind of back up a little bit and answer the question about who should be at the table. And if the rush is to just be eligible for BEAD and get money, you're a little behind. We'll just say that. But one thing we've really learned, especially in rural places, which most of Colorado outside of the Denver metro area our area is that it takes, a few local champions at the table, so in our middle mile network, we serve a hospital district that was having trouble with imaging, getting back and forth because of their network. We have school districts and colleges we talk to. We have 911 call centers. So any sort of local solution, if you will, whether it's a fully public solution or some blended private public-private solution, really one of our jobs, like was suggested, is convening and introducing those local champions to who the local ISPs are, what kind of infrastructure is nearby, who else in the community has an interest in this. And we don't lead that conversation, but we just make sure that there's a conversation going on, and oftentimes can just bring some expertise and some connections to the table. But I will say, where it's been successful in getting connections in local communities, it really has been a mayor or an IT director at a county or somebody who has support from some political backing to just be really dogged about, we need this to be improved. How do I do this? And seeking and looking for partnerships. Andy.
All right. So I'm going to come at it from a little different, from the planning perspective to begin. So, as any good planner can do or does, we apply proven processes for things that work to things that don't. So we've started our planning process modeled after our longstanding process to develop our transportation improvement program. So, in that, and as you all know, it's a very collaborative process, lots of public and stakeholder input, learning what priorities are, learning what the issues are, and kind of convening people around a common table. So when we developed our connectivity improvement program, again modeled after the TIP, we probably spent we engaged a consulting firm through a competitive process, and I want to say at least a quarter to a little bit better, maybe 30% of our funding that we used to develop the plan was centered around stakeholder and public engagement. We really went through a very robust process and engaged over 400 entities throughout the region to learn perspectives, to get people to collaborate, to sit down at a common table, and just voice their concerns and give ideas. And as Ginny and John both alluded to, it's really a lot of stakeholders. We had some planning charrettes. We did stakeholder interviews with elected officials and ISPs and our transportation providers, industry groups. We did a series of 17 in-person community conversations throughout our 10-county region, to go out and learn kind of the human element of the need of broadband, to talk to folks and get those stories of parents driving their children to school parking lots to get on their Wi-Fi to do their homework during COVID. And really to be able to, one, to learn those things, but two, to be able to use those in subsequent grant applications for funding opportunities, not just through BEAD and NTIA, but through USDA or the Appalachian Regional Commission or whatever it may be, to get that human element. We did and again, also to recruit, and I think John mentioned this too, local champions, throughout our communities, trusted local leaders that could really help spread the message to their constituents. We developed press kits and online engagement platform, where they could just, copy and paste our messages into their social media, or we had brochures and pamphlets that we made available. We did a survey, a public survey that had an online component as well as an SMS text component and also a phone component for those that were in unserved or underserved areas. Just a very, very robust planning process. We, during our charrettes, we kind of grouped the stakeholders and participants into really like three categories. Beneficiaries, those are your people that benefit from high-speed internet, school districts, businesses, community anchor institution, healthcare facilities, things like that. Influencers, those were your elected officials, your nonprofits, your foundations, and then partners, state and local governments, transportation agencies, ISPs, industry groups, the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority, which again, just as you heard from John and Jenny, they were signed into law in December of 2021 and really didn't get up and running until 2022. So we're probably even a little bit farther behind both Texas and Colorado in that. But and we group these people together and really to help spur discussions and to bring common issues to light. And we found it very beneficial in our planning process to have that robust participation from such a diverse group. Again, as I mentioned, the issue of broadband accessibility and equity and affordability, we knew it was a problem. And it was a very hot button issue. So really soliciting participation was really pretty easy. But the hard part we found was keeping that momentum and ensuring those discussions were continuing to take place after our planning process was concluded. So really, I mean, it was a little challenging, and some of the things that we've done to keep that momentum going is, we regularly meet with digital inclusion alliances that have formed in a number of our counties throughout the region. Last winter, we held a regional broadband summit. It was a day-long in-person meeting with state, local, and national experts. We discussed pending legislation, digital inclusion and equity, funding, updates from local governments, updates from the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority on what they were up to in terms of BEAD. And they've also rolled out a capital fund program that they use some money from their ARPA allocation to fund. And that's currently in process. We're helping them. Well, actually, I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but there's a number of components to that. Really, it was, at the end of the day, the purpose of the summit was to get people in the same room together, talking to one another. Because when you have a region that's as big as ours, as big as some states, over 7,000 square miles, it's hard to get people to talk to one another in the same room if they're not in the same geography. So we found it was very, very beneficial to really, again, just be conveners of the process. And also it greatly informed our planning process of our strategic plan. It's not just focused on accessibility, but it hits a number of things like equity and workforce and issues like that. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Yeah. So I'll kick it back to Jeff.
And going off of that, Andy, I would ask Ginny and John, can you talk about some of the work that you both are doing as far as equity and access to internet?
Ladies first,
John.
Ginny.
Me first or you first?
Yeah, so we are being a middle mile network. We're sort of a step removed from that, honestly enough. But I will say that it has been the COVID situation was a real eye opener, particularly for school districts, to recognize where their students didn't have access. Andy mentioned, and we had some great anecdotal, terrible really, but excellent communication stories about parents, having to drive their kids, or kids that normally would get bused to, in this case, I was thinking of Red Cliff, which had no internet, no cell service, would have to stay after school or stay at a friend's house to do it. So The school districts actually had mapped that and had some temporary solutions related to that. So if you want to understand where your gaps are, that's one of the best places. If you have those relationships, it's not something publicly that they want to put out there. But in terms of equity and inclusion, one of the things that we found is that almost every one of our communities in the mountains was served by one, we'll just say, uninspired major ISP. In many cases, they hadn't done investment for years, and they really weren't, actively seeking new customers or improving their infrastructure or trying to push that out. So by bringing in more ISPs, we're managing an open access network. Frankly, those new ISPs, a lot of them are smaller, they're just hungrier, they are reaching out a lot more, and they're just a lot more active. So whether or not they're being told, hey, make up the equity gaps, they frankly are. So I'll pause there. Jenny might have a better answer.
No, I agree. I think, having that competition creates, again, cost drivers, because one of the issues will be affordability for anyone. As you have one ISP come into an area, there's no one to monitor or drive the rate any direction. And the Affordable Connectivity Program, which we've tried to push a lot of people to, will eventually expire. And so what happens after that for these individuals who have to choose food security over broadband? They're going to probably choose food, right? So everyone has choices in their household, and broadband may not be at the top of their list. So we really are pushing out that Affordable Connectivity Program. And so in competition, it's important because in the rural areas, we found, particularly, we look at like Deep East Texas, which is probably the lowest served area and one of the lowest served areas in the country. And their rates are higher than our urban areas for the providers that they have now. And that's also a high poverty area. So how are we going to differentiate that? So we're going to be doing some work in that space as we move forward, monitoring kind of the pricing that these providers are giving individuals when they do receive the BEAD funds, to make sure that it's affordable, and as much as we can exert influence on that, right? But we do want to be involved in those conversations and pointing out where it is happening. The other thing we have done is the regional councils in Texas are the area agencies on aging, serving seniors 60 plus across our entire state. And we are doing pilot programs now to provide devices to individuals through that AAA, along with training in multiple languages. So the individual will get a device, and then they will also receive training. We take for granted, I think we all remember our first computer. We didn't even know how to power it up, right? Look what you can do now, all these tricks and tools that you learn. And so teaching individuals simple things like powering the device on, and then how to access the functions that they need, is a program we're piloting. We received foundation dollars to fund that, but we'll be applying under any and all resources to expand that program to all of our area agencies on aging, as an existing network that the regional councils have. And many of our regional councils also do housing programs and workforce training programs. So I think it's important that they also help inform the state and federal government on the gaps and how we as existing networks can participate in closing those. There is no need to reinvent these networks. We already have them. Regional councils already have them. So it seems to me to be the perfect place to lend programs like what I'm talking about with the AAA to help people access. In our state, the insurers have a vested interest in having their clients access bill information and healthcare information online, right? Everyone's going digital. So you might in your state be able to find those insurers who are interested in investing in your AAA to provide that same service. They want people to stay enrolled. They want it all to be digital, and having people with devices and access and that can share with their friends and neighbors is one step in doing that. Now, we can't guarantee they'll have broadband at this point, but they'll have a device. They'll know how to access the internet if they can find Wi-Fi, or if they have broadband capability where they live or in their home. Then they can access it there. So those are some of the ways that we're working in the diversity and equity and inclusion space, and there's plenty more to do.
Can I jump back in for 1 second here? So another thing I wanted to mention that we're doing, again, we secured some foundation funding to do our planning for around broadband for the region, but we were also successful in securing additional funding from the foundation to do some implementation and some technical assistance. So when we contracted our consulting team to do the strategic plan, we also included in that RFP to have them be on call to the MPO for a period of 3 years with a series of 2 one-year extensions to be able to provide that technical assistance to us and in turn our communities. So in using that extra funding for from the foundations, we're able to do a number of things. We at the beginning of the process, looking at equity, we did something I think was pretty unique and pretty cool. I'm not sure that there's any other place, at least I've seen so far, that has approached it this way. We took some open source data to map our unserved and underserved areas across the region, but then on top of that, and loaded this into an interactive ArcGIS online platform that's still available on our website. We also overlaid socioeconomic and demographic data, certain data sets like low income and senior populations, populations with low English, limited English proficiency, populations with no access to vehicles, disabled populations, things like that. So when you layer these things together, it really starts to paint the picture of where the real need is in terms of accessibility and equity and affordability. And we found that that's been very, very useful for us in our counties who are undertaking their own broadband programs, pursuing funding through the Broadband Authority Office or through ARC or through other mechanisms. They're all using that data to be able to, again, to build their case for to where their deployment areas are and why it's so critical. And then lastly, in terms of equity and inclusion, we're currently beginning the development of a regional digital navigator model program for our counties and local governments. So we're going to be gathering resources, going out and inventorying community anchor institutions and inventorying agencies and libraries and schools and things like that. And putting together potential partnerships, convening partnerships with them, but also too providing curriculum resources on a consistent regional level. We have going to be developing a marketing program again. So if you feel you're part of a larger regional network, it's sometimes it's easier to have folks buy into that as a county by county base. So again, it's just a tool and it's a resource that we're providing to our local governments and our counties to be able to go in and take this information. It's really the basis of a digital navigator program for a county or a group of municipalities in a county. Then they can go in and tailor the program to themselves, pick and choose what they want, what they need, use the existing data. And again, it really saves them the time and the effort and the money is to going out and doing this on their own and possibly being duplicative of another municipality that's 20 or 30 miles away.
I think it's an understatement to say that there's a lot of funding out there, and it can certainly be confusing. So one question I have for everyone, and maybe EDA wants to jump in here as well. How are you helping your members, your communities, navigate this space of what we are calling the federal funding fire hose?
And I'll jump in with a couple comments, and then I'd love to hear whether or not these are landing well with folks. First of all, I think to the point that Andy just made about creating these overlaid data sets, that's really important. And we know that not every state, not every region has the capacity to do that. So those slides that I gave, we provided some funding for the Argonne National Labs to create this data explorer that ingests some of these key type of the demographics and information about where there's gaps. And it does include some of the information about broadband availability. So that would be a great tool for those who don't have the capability to build one. And I have a couple of those navigators now. You know, there can be too many websites to navigate, too many guidebooks to navigate. You might need a navigator to navigate those. So that's where I think the federal program officers at NTIA for each state can kind of help maybe direct traffic a little bit more to some of those. The FCC, I know, is building these maps that are intended to show where those investments are and aren't. And they did encourage a lot of feedback from states and regions because it's not always correct, the information they have on there. So I think they're still encouraging you guys to really show them where that information needs to be better updated. So those are some of the tools that are out there to help guide folks through this, but it can still be difficult because I think everyone is still catching up with all of the funding, all of the investments and where they're coming from in all these different places, including the ARPA funding from Treasury, where a lot of this is coming from. And I know you've been tracking that in your organization as well.
Yeah, in Colorado, the governor's office, in an effort to get these funds out and recognizing they're coming on fast, and as you said, a fire hose, funded through each of the COGs a position for regional grants navigator, who basically, I'll say, does sort of grants triage, right? And so communities may come to that person or the other way around saying, hey, I'd like to do this. And they're able to say, no, this don't even bother with this. Go over here. This might work for you. And help them sort of, like I said, triage initially where to go. Because as Nancy alluded to just for a local government, you know, a manager or, you know, depending on who's, hey, planner or hey, clerk, go check this out. It's overwhelming. And so that's why we basically need, okay, what subject area that navigator go, okay, well, the CBO, Colorado Broadband Up is the right place for that. If it's broadband, oh, you're interested in roads, here's where you go for that. And basically just navigating that first step, because so much of this doesn't fit for various reasons. Many of our local governments are too small, they don't income qualify, or you just basically you're saving a lot of time by helping them to know is as an NO. Don't pursue this, don't pursue that.
Can I ask a question, John? Sorry. How did your state fund the positions at each of your regional councils? Was that through state appropriations or was that through the federal money?
It was state appropriations, but I believe they actually did that through the federal money. So then the governor's office had some discretion with that. So I thought it was a great use of it.
Mm-hmm. If I can comment, I think Nancy mentioned the maps. That has been a real challenge, I think, across the country. I know in Texas in particular, our state developed its own maps that don't match the federal maps. We've now abandoned our state maps because the federal consultant and the state consultant won't share the data, which I find to be problematic since taxpayers paid for them to aggregate the data. But I don't know how it could be proprietary after we've all paid for it. But that's a whole nother legal issue. But the other thing is that the federal government is continuing to take rolling challenges. So continue to look at those maps. It's complicated. And how you have to challenge is take some subject matter expertise. It's almost like you need an IT high school student to really help you with it, who might be willing to volunteer to do the project in your communities. A kid who's really good with computers and GIS and other things could probably do this with their eyes closed, but it's way too complicated for the layperson to contest. Not to mention the individuals who likely need to contest don't have broadband. So how are they going to challenge a map when they need the internet? So I would encourage people to continue to look to how they can challenge the maps, because they are going to take snapshots in time. And each federal agency that has these programs will use their own snapshot in time as they continue to roll out, whether it's through BEAD or other sources. So BOOT, of course, had its own snapshot. BEAD will have its own snapshot, and any other programs will as well. Unfortunately, the NTIA map that they've chosen wasn't designed for this process. So I think they're all doing the best they can with the tools they've been given, but it's incumbent on us to try to help inform the change to the maps. We have some areas that are completely incorrectly marked, where, you know, locally and regionally that they do not have access to broadband. So we have to challenge what the ISPs have shared with the state and NTIA.
It's a huge barrier.
Mhm.
Yeah, we assisted our counties in submitting challenges as well. You know, again, some of these more rural counties have, you know, a planning department staff of one that covers transportation, economic development, stormwater, you know, what have you. So yeah, we assisted a number of our counties in submitting and did the challenge process for them.
All right, I think in our last remaining moments, maybe let's discuss some takeaways. What advice would you give those on the call who are trying to coordinate, whether it's with their municipalities or at the state level or the federal level? What sort of tactics would you leave them with?
I regularly take our broadband development office director to coffee, just to see how he can better engage local governments and regional governments. He does not have, he has never worked in local government, so it's a perspective that he doesn't have. So I would say if they have regional representatives or county representatives coming out of your broadband development offices now, that would be important to maintain a positive relation with them and insist that they engage in dialogue with the local communities. Like any other infrastructure project, even though the federal law requires coordination, I think for this program, there's no requirement that an ISP apply alongside a local government. That's something that's a misperception. So you almost have to bring everyone to the table to force them to take your input, because there isn't really, it's not required. It is encouraged. So I would say that the other thing is our state has put together statewide working groups that will continue looking at this topic over time. And so getting a role for your regional planning commission or your COG on that statewide working group with your broadband development office, whatever that looks like at the state level, at least one representative, if you don't have a state association, someone who's in the broadband space, is very important. Not to slight local elected officials, but I would encourage that it is a planner and not necessarily a local elected official representative, because they aren't entrenched in this like some of you may be or may want to be. So you can help share that voice at the state level. Those are some of the things that I see as important.
I would recommend being cautious if people are just coming to the table of pointing towards this funding right now. And because this is a longer game than that. And this funding is going to be over 3 or 4 years, just to be clear about that. But if you gather people around the table and say, you got to do this in this short time frame, and you haven't set the groundwork, you're going to discourage a lot of people. But I would rather encourage people to say, look, improving broadband in your community is something you can do, and it has been done. There is not a really good template for how to do it, right? It is so much, like I said, who you can bring to the table, what resources are there, how willing those ISPs that are there, the champions and whatnot. But, you know, getting people around the table and frankly, winnowing away folks who really just are, you know, talk and not really wanting to get at it. You know, I would start winnowing down to the people who really want to act and move. And you can make progress, and there will be funding available. So that's what I'm going to say about that. Take a longer game.
To add to that, before you start, Andy, one of the things we've been successful at as a group is to influence our state to appropriate or consider appropriating money towards long-term broadband projects, not only for the support of the Broadband Development Office, but after this funding goes away. We have a constitutional amendment on our ballot in November to create a broadband infrastructure fund. So it would be a fund outside the Treasury that would fund broadband activity in perpetuity. So that goes back to that kind of sustainment question that I asked earlier. Once these ISPs get this money, it's still probably not going to be profitable for them to be in the areas where they haven't served already. So who's going to pick up the pieces when they may abandon or be unable to maintain the projects that they put in the ground? And I think it will be regional governments and local governments that will have to step up and fill that gap at some point in the long game, as John mentioned.
Yeah, I would just say participate in their processes. make sure you're involved, coordinate early and often. I'm lucky because the executive director of our state broadband office came from a neighboring regional commission. Our regional commission to the directly to the east of us. So I knew him previously.
That's a dream come true.
Yeah, right. So so that worked for us, but not saying that'll work for everybody. But yeah, I mean, provide assistance where you can. And especially, in the case of ours, they started out with a staff of 2. I think they're up to about 10 now, and I think that they're almost fully staffed out. So, anything that you can assist them with in terms of promotion of local meetings, or providing insight or data or contacts for local constituents or stakeholders. We found that they're very grateful to receive those things. And again, I would just, coordinate early and often. Set up, if you can, a monthly or bi-monthly meeting just to check in and chat. If you're in, the Capitol, stop in, talk to them. It's really been beneficial for us just to kind of keep an ongoing dialogue. We're also doing a small business survey and strategy guide for small businesses in underserved and unserved areas. And we invited the Broadband Authority to serve on our steering committee. So things like that really go a long way in building relationships.
To tack onto that, EDA is funding in each of our states, I believe, if your state accepted the money, a statewide economic development plan. And so we're serving on that committee to help them with that plan, to include broadband as an important tool to make sure that the regional role in all of the economic and district role in all of the economic development space, but looking at broadband as another infrastructure piece, that is an economic development tool. So if you aren't participating or don't know that your state is doing a statewide economic development plan, that would be another place to tap in to advocate for not only your role in broadband if you already have one, but the important input of local elected officials on any economic development project or infrastructure project. And thank you, EDA, Nancy. Big plug there.
All right, I think we're just about at time. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a huge thank you to EDA and to Nancy for joining us, as well as our panelists. You provided so much great information today, and we will be sharing this out with everyone. All right.
Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.